ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. We begin tonight with the Secretary of State's mission to make peace in the Middle East. It is in trouble. Mr. Baker announced today that he will delay his return to Israel to make an unexpected side trip on Thursday to the Soviet Union to see if his Soviet counterpart has any ideas. Today, Mr. Baker focused his negotiating skills on the Syrian president, Hafez al-Assad. And as ABC's John McWethy reports, he did not have an easy time of it.
It appears that Secretary Baker had as little success with Syria as he has had with Israel. After 9.5 hours of intense negotiations with President Assad, there was no sign he had persuaded the Syrian leader to agree to attend a peace conference. Baker could only muster a very strained assessment, calling the marathon talks useful and no more.
Did you make any progress, Mr. Baker?
Well, I hope we did. We'll see.
In 2 previous trips to Syria, Baker has not been able to get Assad to move on any of the major points of contention. Who would run the conference, what authority it would have to impose solutions, and how the Palestinians would be represented. From the beginning, Baker believed that the 2 most difficult parties to bring to a peace conference would be Syria and Israel. That is now proving to be the case. Although the Saudis have refused to attend, Egypt, Jordan, and the Palestinians have all showed new flexibility. Israel, for its part, has said it will come, but only under strict conditions that Syria has consistently rejected. Baker plans to return to Israel on Friday, but without movement there, the Secretary is expected to give up on the peace process for now, challenging everyone involved to give him a call when they are serious about taking the kinds of steps he feels are necessary to make a peace conference work. John McWethy, ABC News, Damascus.
The Iraqi government has sent a letter to the UN Security Council today in which it calls the refugee camps the U.S. is building in northern Iraq a flagrant violation of Iraq's sovereignty. Iraq wants the UN to take them over. The U.S. has already said it also wants the UN to be in charge as soon as the UN has the personnel, the money, and the authority to operate. Iraq has also made another effort to convince the Kurds that it is safe for them to come home. In Iraq tonight, ABC's Mark Litke.
In the Kurdish town of Duhok, almost every business remains closed. Entire neighborhoods empty. There's no electricity, little water. Soldiers still patrol the streets. Yet the Iraqi government insists life is returning to normal. And they escorted a dozen Western journalists here today to show that it's safe for the Kurdish refugees to return home. It was obvious that several thousand have returned already, mostly the very old and the very young. We were taken to this school where the children said their families had only fled in the first place because they were forced to by Kurdish rebels. Some older Kurds, however, told us they simply fled without thinking, caught up in the panic at the time. This man returned not because Iraq guaranteed his safety, but because he was too weak and hungry to go on. His wife, children, and grandchildren are still in the mountains. The Iraqi government has promised amnesty to people involved in the uprising here and elsewhere, with the exception of those who committed murder, rape, or robbery. The governor of Duhok says the only reason more people haven't come back is that they're being threatened by the rebels.
They prevent them, the rebellions now prevent them from coming back.
That charge will be difficult for Iraqi officials to prove, but what was clear during today's visit, the vast majority of this town's residents have not returned yet. Mark Litke, ABC News, Duhok.
Every disaster brings its error in statistics, and the State Department says today it made a mistake yesterday when it reported that the death rate in the refugee camps was down to about 60 a day. The real number, the State Department says, is still above 500 a day, and even that is a very rough estimate. As you have surely noticed, a number of ABC News correspondents have gone to report on the tragedy of the Kurdish refugees. Every one of them, when filing his or her first report, has tried to make us all, so far away, understand how terrible it is up close. And ABC's Jim Wooten has just arrived.
The Turks call them the mountains of dreams. The refugees call them a nightmare, especially Ishikberen, the largest and worst of the camps, a wretched tent city the size of Richmond or Raleigh. 200,000 Kurds from northern Iraq scattered across the Turkish slopes. For 3 weeks now, their only food and water have come from the air. And for 3 weeks now, it hasn't been enough. Especially for the children.
I miss water and food, like bread and cheese.
And there is more than food missing from their lives. Abdi is tired of the filth. He wants a shampoo, a bath. Hindi's parents are missing. She's not the only child alone. With no sanitation, the camp is infested with human excrement and the flies and the sickness that follow. At least 25 babies die every day. There may be worse places on earth, but probably not. And each day, the misery and misfortune multiply. These men were hurt by a truck that overturned, until at last, in desperation, treated primitively, they respond primitively. Not surprisingly, they lose control. This fight was over water being hauled from a landing zone at the bottom of the mountain.
Almost certainly these scenes will be repeated tomorrow and the day after that, and for as long as the Kurds are trapped here in the mountains. Mired in squalor and surrounded by death and disease, they're not only prisoners of war, they're casualties as well.
American GIs wanted no more casualties today when they delivered 100 tons of food to the camp, this time by land. They cleared their weapons and heard a warning from their commander.
Safety. Don't drive over any refugees.
They didn't. The Kurds kept their distance, and despite the weeks of gnawing hunger, they kept their dignity too. They seemed to trust the Americans and waited with amazing patience while the GIs stacked the supplies. A few truckloads of Kurds left for a better camp, not in Iraq, but closer to it. And so there were fewer refugees in Ishikverin tonight, but no less misery in the mountains. Jim Wooten, ABC News on the Iraqi-Turkish border.
In a moment, the Pentagon chooses Lockheed to build the fighter plane of the future. In other news, the administration's crime bill is on the American agenda tonight. We'll have the view from the streets and the lingering effects of Chernobyl and the questions of Soviet children.
This is World News Tonight with Peter.